I remember when the war was beginning to ramp up. By the war, I mean when the coalition was forming to try and reclaim Kuwait. We had to board all the windows, and we had to put plastic bags along all the walls and windows because Saddam Hussein was threatening to use chemical weapons to annihilate the kind of Kuwaiti population. Thankfully, he didn't do that. But when the war happened, there was a Scud missile that fell about 30 yards away from the house, and it shattered all the windows in the house. And I remember we're sleeping in the living room on the ground floor under the window, and the force of the blast basically shattered the window on the board and flew over me.
Afif, I'm so glad you're back.
I'm so happy I'm back. Do you know why I came back?
Why?
I came back because I want you to tell me who got more listens, me or my wife. You still haven't shared that information with me.
I can look that up actually.
I want to know. I actually
think it was you, because yours was so niche, and people that want to listen to breastfeeding, they really want to listen to breastfeeding, don't they?
I'm absolutely going to love
Let me see 1 second. I'm going to look it up because I have all the stats here.
I'm going to love rubbing that in her face.
Your poor missus. Okay, so let me see. Let me see. That's terrible. That's typical. Trying to... God, I'm going way back here. I've done so many of them. Yours was very popular though.
Was it? Yeah.
Well, and you won an award. You won an award for the podcast that I did for you. You divil you.
I know, yeah, it's amazing.
Afif and I did a podcast on breastfeeding, and Afif won the award because, you know, I think it's because you're a man only, Afif. I think that's the lure.
Exactly. There was no other reason.
Oh my goodness, your wife actually... Now that I'm looking at it, that's gas. Your wife beat you.
Did
she was double yours.
Are you serious? Oh no. Okay, can we take this bit out of the...
She was very interesting though.
She was.
And she's so laid back.
Yeah. I think you see, people really like her, and I don't think she realizes how much she is liked. And I might actually now, I think she's worthy to be a guest on my podcast.
I'm actually surprised you haven't had her on already. She's so good.
Well, yeah,
that was a podcast with Anne Doherty, an anaesthetist, and so interested talking about switching off people's consciousness. I think that was really grabby when we put that out.
Yeah, she's going to love this now. She's going to rub it in my face. I now wish that I didn't ask.
I actually never look at the stats really, and only just the totals. So I must actually go back and see who. Maybe I'll just get Anne on again. But anyway, we're here today to talk about something a little bit different to what we spoke about before. So obviously you need no introduction. You're a neonatologist.
Yeah.
You look after small little babies. And you're also, I was going to say you're also a breastfeeder, but you're not. You're a lactation consultant.
I don't think biologically I've evolved that much yet.
No. But we're here today to talk about a few little things that I thought that it would be interesting to get you back and talk about. The first being, I suppose, cancel culture.
Yes.
And what it means on social media currently for anyone, any healthcare professional that's trying to put information out there. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I suppose, you living through the war in Kuwait when you were living there. The fact that you're half Palestinian as well.
Yeah.
Might be interesting. And now, look, we'll see where the conversation takes us, Afif.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't shut anything down. So let's go. So cancel culture, you've had your own experience with it recently, and I suppose it's quite difficult to navigate, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something that I have been grappling with for a while, and I know that a lot of healthcare professionals that are on social media in its various forms do talk about every now and again, but I think it's becoming a lot more prominent because, I mean, if you go back into, I actually looked up cancel culture to see when did that term emerge, and it actually was coined, I think, in the early 2000s. So as early as that somebody actually labeled this sort of approach as cancel culture, but we've kind of always had cancel culture, this sort of shutting down and shaming of people. And the one I read that was really, really funny to me was, if you go to a restaurant and eat a meal and then run away, the restaurant will put a picture up of you to say you're banned from coming here. And that was sort of the first form of public shaming that used to happen before. But now, with social media being so prominent, it's a lot easier to cancel somebody on that medium, for example, especially if there's a big pile-on about something that was said or an idea that was pitched. And it's becoming and I'm sure you've had an experience with it yourself,
Oh, yeah.
very common and very prominent.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that sometimes something that is said, somebody may hear a snippet of something that is taken out of context and without looking at the whole picture, and somebody may not like that idea. And instead of engaging in a useful discourse with somebody, the impulse is to just shut them down and stop them from saying anything.
And insult them, and then not allow the dialogue to happen in a normal debate like the way it should, I think, which is really unfortunate, because conversations get shut down and people get afraid to talk about something then.
Yeah. And we'll talk about specifics in a second, but I think it comes from a couple of things. I think it's a lot easier to challenge somebody or attempt to cancel somebody via social media. You're not doing it directly to their face. So there's that, I suppose, buffer layer between you and the person, that it sort of dehumanizes the other person because you're not really meeting them face to face. And as a result, it's a lot easier to challenge them or push that idea away, an idea that you might like or an idea that might trigger you. I hate the word trigger. We might talk about that.
Sure, everything's triggering.
Yeah, everything's triggering. And the other issue is, unfortunately, social media, it's hard to critically think about something when we are in this kind of fast-paced bombardment of information, right? I mean, if you're watching reels, you might find yourself scrolling through one reel after another so quickly that our ability to maintain attention onto something is so limited now that you might grasp an idea, not like it, and shut it down straight away without actually critically thinking about, okay, why am I having this reaction? Why is this something that is invoking these emotions in me? And I mean, social media is to blame because I think it's amplified cancel culture, and it's made it a lot easier to shut something down. And there is a bit of a herd mentality there, isn't there? If somebody dislikes the idea, then it attracts other people that also dislike the idea, and then there's this snowballing effect where all of a sudden...
And then it seems like as if everyone that's looking at it doesn't like it, but it's actually only the small few that have voices very loud that pile on. And, you know, I've put stuff up. Thankfully, it hasn't happened to me an awful lot. But, you know, I've had DMs going, I actually, you know, totally loved what you said, but I you know, there's no way I'm going to comment on that because I'll be afraid these people will chase me then. So
yes, and I was just about to say that I've had a very similar experience in that there are loud voices that publicly challenge what you say in an adversarial way. And then all the comments you see on that page is that side. And then you may have somebody with maybe a different view, an opposing view. Then they're afraid to be the sole person there. And then, but you then get so many DMs saying, thank you for saying this, thank you for saying that, I really agree. And you're like, thank you for agreeing with me, but, you know, coming to me personally is not going to help demonstrate that there is a debate. It's not a one-sided thing. But of course, you can't say that to somebody that messages you to say, look, thank you for saying that. But that's something that I suppose you don't see on social media, is the direct messaging aspect of it. Like, you may get a lot of support.
It's all hidden. And look, I can understand why people do that. They don't want to get involved in it, particularly when people seem to be, you know, quite nasty or very vocal. And, you know, things can get quite nasty when you allow for open commentary. And you had it recently with a post that you did about home births. Yeah, I loathe to kind of mention the H word, and we did debate prior to coming on the podcast whether we would talk about it or not. But I suppose we'll talk about the topic in general rather than making a comment one way about it or another. But I did put a post up on home birth, I suppose, questioning some of the outcome data that were reported associated with home births. And again, I was sort of posing the question, should we look at it differently? Because my aim really was to have the information in an accessible way that is easily understandable. And I was challenged quite vehemently about it. And it sort of spiraled in a negative way, unfortunately. And nothing I said was reconcilable, and nothing I said was being agreed with. I actually got a lot of messages in private saying, thank you, that makes it a lot more understandable. Thank you for saying this. Thank you for saying this. That's something that needed to be said. But
on the sort of apparent side of that post, it was all negative.
Just to be really clear, what you had said was is you had put up about statistics. Like,
yes.
And, they're there in black and white.
Yeah, and basically was questioning the rate of neonatal mortality or the rate of neonatal deaths associated with home births and how they should be counted and whether they should be counted in one way or another, and that the comparisons made against hospital may not be fair because the hospital sees all comers high risk and low risk, whereas home births see low risk. So the figures should be relatively lower in home birth, not the same as hospital births. And that was what I brought up. And, it was challenged quite a lot. And I decided to end up, it's too much of a headache, I'm taking it down. And then, a lot of people said, why did you take that down? And I did think about, well, why did I take it down? Well, I took it down because there was just too much negativity there that I did not want to deal with. Was I right to take it down? I think on balance, yes, because a lot of people were hurt and that wasn't my intention. And a lot of people maybe apparently on the actual page felt that, maybe that's not the forum to discuss things like that.
Well, then where is the forum? Where are people going to get the information?
And that's the reality of our current modern living, is that, let's be realistic, people get most of their information from social media. And that's what I suppose drove me to change my Instagram from being pure art to adding a lot of medical information there to make it accessible to families. And that's, I suppose, what inspired me to start the podcast, to package bits of information for parents in a way that they could easily digest. I mean, you could listen to a podcast anywhere, doing almost anything. Whereas if you're looking for information online, you have to seek it out and you have to be able to figure out whether it's information that you can trust or not. So that's why I think having pages by medical professionals that you can trust is actually such a great resource for people, that they can access and that they could learn and they could get information. And there are a lot of good accounts out there locally here in Ireland. And we had Dr. Dina O'Leary on our podcast recently. I'm plugging my podcast so much here, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Afif, I'll allow you to plug it.
And by the way, it's a Tuesday, right? Both our podcasts come out at the same time. Yeah, so please switch off and switch on to the other one here. Stop listening to me talking here. I'm only joking.
What's your podcast called? Remind everyone.
The Baby Tribe podcast. Okay. Yeah. But Dr. O'Leary, when I asked her that question about, should healthcare professionals have Instagram pages and whatnot, and what she said really resonated with me, that if you don't have people advocating for correct information, then misinformation will prevail. Mm-hmm. And the pages that may have hidden agendas will spread like wildfire. And then the parents or patients or individuals in general will only have access to misinformation. So I think we probably do have a responsibility to spread the information on these on social media in order for people to have access to them, But it's difficult then when people disagree with what you're saying. Yeah.
To go out fighting, because I think as well as a healthcare professional, you're held to a higher standard and you have to give correct advice.
Yes.
But then if people come down on your page and start writing misinformation on your page,
yes,
that's when it gets quite hairy then, because you're like, do I take this post down? Do I just stop the comments?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ambiguity there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And, and yourself, we don't put a piece of information on our social media pages lightly. There's so much background research that goes into a post like that to make sure that it adheres to best practice and that, it is the best information available at the time based on the latest research, that it takes a lot of work to actually talk about a particular topic, let's say colic or reflux, or I'm just sticking to kind of sort of my bread and butter. And I know you do the same for your page, and you, I've learned a lot from your page as well. And a lot of the
drugs.
time, a lot of the time I go off and read about it, and it's like, that's not that I don't believe what you say, but it sparks my interest to go read up on the topic. And then often you find that, look, this is actually great. It got me to learn about something. It got me to read about something. And the good thing is that we always seek what we're familiar with in terms of books and reading and research, but you may come across a post from yourself or somebody else about a topic that you may not know a lot about, that you may not normally be interested in, and it may spark your interest and then say, oh gosh, I've learned something new today that I otherwise would not have learned.
It's about the cannabis gummies. That was the thing that you were interested in, wasn't it?
Yeah. Those ones. I'm still looking for them. Yeah. No, I'm not.
Give you the number. I'll give you the number.
Exactly.
And then we were going to talk about the ethics around research in the neonatal and maternity care.
Yes. It's very interesting. I think women, especially pregnant women, are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to scientific and medical advancements, and their babies as well. And we sort of touched on this discussion before, me and you, when we talked about the lack of information on medications during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And where does that stem from? Well, it stems from the almost automatic exclusion of pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and babies from scientific research, especially by those conducted by industry, for fear of litigation. Because there's always the potential for adverse events or side effects to happen when you're experimenting or when you are assessing the efficacy or the safety of a new drug. So automatically, who do they involve? Usually
men. Women are too difficult to monitor.
Yes.
And they cost nearly twice as much as men to monitor because of our menstrual cycle.
But then what do? We generalize, don't we? We generalize the information we get that we glean from a very sort of, let's say, non-representative cohort, to make an assumption that it will behave or work in the same way in everybody else. But that's not reality. In reality, we are now dealing with mums that are pregnant that need medication. We are dealing with breastfeeding mums that need medication. We have medication that we have to try on very premature babies. And even in neonatology, a lot of the medications that we use, we have very little data to back up their use. We often extrapolate from older children and adults. And preterm babies have a very unique physiology. Their body works in such a unique way that no other age group behave the same way.
Is that to do with how they metabolize drugs, how they...
It's to do with the fact that they're meant to be in the womb and not outside, and if let's say a baby is born at 24, 25 weeks gestation, their lungs aren't mature enough, their heart isn't mature enough, their brain isn't mature enough, their lungs aren't mature enough, their kidneys, their liver, all their organs aren't mature. We kind of don't know how they respond to medication. I'll give you an example. And try not to be kind of too technical, but we give, drugs that are called beta agonists to improve the forceful contraction of the heart. Let's say if your heartbeat is weak, we give something called a beta agonist, which attaches to receptors on your heart and tells your heart to beat stronger, right? We know that because we've done those experiments in adults, and we know that these kind of drugs work. What we've discovered relatively recently is that those type of receptors only develop in the late third trimester in babies. So we're giving those drugs, but there are no receptors for them to attach on the heart. So they're where we assume that they improve the forceful contractions of the heart. We have now recently discovered that, they may not actually achieve that. What they might do is something completely different in this preterm population. But because we don't have the data, and it's hard to do those tests or experiments, and people shy away from calling them experiments, but they really are experiments. When we're testing a new drug in a patient population, we're experimenting to see, does it benefit or does it not? And we have to make a lot of assumptions, and we have to rely on a lot of observational data of things that we see work, things that we see that don't work, to modify how we treat and approach the babies. But
can you just explain what observational data is to people, please?
Yeah, so observational data is, there are two big major groups of studies, things that we call experimental studies, things that we call observational studies. In experimental studies, just putting it very basically, you give half the population in your study something, you give the other half nothing or placebo, and you look at differences in outcomes. So you're actually almost imposing something on half of the population. With observational, you just follow patients without imposing something on them, but you observe to see, okay, we're going to look at the bunch of babies that happen to receive drug A for an apparent reason, not in a study sense, but in a clinical setting. And then we are going to compare them to a bunch of babies that did not receive that drug and look at the outcomes. There are issues with that design in that, well, the babies received the drug for a reason, and the other babies didn't receive the drug
It's like not ethical at all.
because they were better.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that it's not ethical, but sometimes the differences in outcomes may not be attributed to the fact that they got the drug. It could be that their basic characteristics are different.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. What I meant about it being not ethical, if you're giving a drug to babies that are sick,
Yes.
not really knowing what the outcome is, and then, or else you see a benefit with those babies, then do you stop the trial and start just putting everyone on it?
Yeah.
Like, there's loads to it. It's quite nuanced, isn't it?
It's quite nuanced. So we rely on a lot of observational data, meaning, we observe what we have done over the last years to see whether it has been of benefit or not, and then we modify what we do based on that. It's really hard to run randomized trials in the neonatal population. I know from experience, you have to jump through so many hoops. You have to ensure that there are safety protocols that you adhere to, all appropriate, absolutely, because the number one is safety. But then it does take a long time to look at the benefits or lack thereof of medication. And the same applies then to breastfeeding mums and pregnant mums. There's always a worry of litigation when you're doing experimental studies like this. Gosh, I don't want to expose fetuses to a drug because I don't know how the drug's going to behave. I mean, you can understand the hesitation
my goodness,
enrolling.
But even with breastfeeding, there's so many, on the back of every pack of everything, it doesn't say safe in pregnancy. Even sorry, in safe in breastfeeding, it says, if you're breastfeeding, please, discuss with your doctor or pharmacist. But sure, the doctor or pharmacist is taking on that liability themselves by saying that it's okay. Because now with breastfeeding, thankfully, we have like years of this observational data to show, say, there are many drugs that can be taken, but there are still a lot of doctors and pharmacists that are not willing to say that's okay to take because of the fear of litigation. I can completely understand why people would be
the default is no.
Yeah,
right?
the default is no, which is really unfortunate because then there's a cohort of women then that are really not being looked after.
And one of the reasons I wanted to become a lactation consultant and study the physiology of lactation and learn about the mechanisms of transfer of drugs between blood and the breast is to have the almost basic physiological knowledge to try and figure it out, right? Because we know, for example, if a mother is on blood pressure medication, beta blockers, we know that we can give some versus we can't give some based on the characteristics of that drug. If a drug is lipid soluble, meaning it loves sticking to lipids, then it's more likely to be transferred into breast milk, whereas one that's more water soluble is more likely to stay in the mother's bloodstream and not transfer into milk. So knowing those basics can help us even without study data to help rationalize medications that mums are on. But not everybody puts in the effort to learn these things, and you are taking on a bit of a risk by recommending or not recommending a medication to, let's say, a breastfeeding mum, for example. But we have to look after the mums as well as the baby. There are two in this equation. We can't default always to say no because it may do X, Y, and Z to the baby. You have to do a bit of research and figure it out. And I have to say, we have an amazing kudos to the pharmacy department in the Rotunda Hospital. They really go all out to actually always come up with answers for us when it's to do with medications and breastfeeding.
Pharmacists do love an owl challenge, though. They do love doing that kind of research.
Yeah, but we really can't live without the pharmacy support in an intensive care setting like that, because they really have the expertise. And when the data isn't there, they do the research and they find it.
Okay. Can I just ask you, being a neonatologist and seeing small little babies born at 24 weeks, does that cause your heart to pump really hard and give you lots of adrenaline? Do you love it, or does it scare you?
It doesn't scare me anymore. It used to scare me before, but I sort of go into a trance of I have a job that I need to do right here, and I try and not get too excited or too scared about the task and sort of process that later once the baby's stabilized. Okay. I sort of go into this almost calm trance
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but I'm calm, I'm focused, I'm collected, and because often you're looking after the baby, but you also have to acknowledge the parents that you have to deal with. You may have a junior member of staff that is learning as well, that you have to look after them and teach them at the same time. And then you have a team with you as well that helps. So you're not on your own. It's a team effort. I may be the person ultimately responsible and in charge, but ultimately it's a team effort to stabilize a baby born at 500 grams over the first few minutes, few hours. You can't do this alone. Our neonatal nursing staff are exceptional, and I would trust my life to them, and
Jesus, Afif, and it's just brought this to my head now, and I know we hadn't discussing this, but like that Lucy Letby trial over in
Yes.
the UK where that nurse has been put in jail now for all of those offences. It's just, I was listening to the podcast trial. I think there was about 9 or 10 episodes. After 2.5, I couldn't listen to it anymore.
Yeah.
It was, you can't fathom how someone would do that to these like little
and I'm sure
tiny babies.
A lot of parents were cognizant and aware of that story when they had babies in a neonatal intensive care unit. And I mean, the staff were very aware of it, and they did their best to assure the parents that they were in the best of care, that this is an isolated incident, that this is not something that is common or is likely to happen again, and that their babies were in the best of care. I don't, in my experience with it, have thankfully had parents that, were upset about it, but I know it was there in the background.
Oh my goodness, it's unbelievable. On the note about you dealing with like little 500-gram babies, I remember sending you something that I'd seen on Instagram. You were like, when the paediatrician comes in to check to discharge you and your baby, this is obviously like a full-term baby, and like it shows the paediatrician with a doll almost, or is it actually a real baby?
It's a doll.
It's swinging it around its head and it's turning it upside down, hanging it from its big toe and stuff like that. And it's like the perception of the mother, you're in there manhandling their baby.
So I routinely get this sent by various people, both ex-patients and friends and colleagues, to say, haha, this is what you do. And you know what the funny thing is? It gave me a bit more insight to maybe now explain to parents and mums what I'm about to do before I do it. Because I think, most parents, in fairness, don't mind, but there are a couple of parents who jump and do the same reflex as the babies do when you do the reflex in the baby, and now explain, like, I'm about to do this, it's normal, I'm looking for it. And I think it kind of diffuses the situation a bit.
It's gas though, isn't it? I remember seeing that. It was just so funny. And it is, especially with your first, it's like this person coming in handling your baby when by the time the third one comes along, it's grand. Anyone can swing it around his head.
But just going back briefly onto the lack of data on, pregnant mums, breastfeeding mums and babies, is that we really need to support research in this patient population, because they do deserve better. And we need to know how drugs work in various situations. And really the only way to do it is to, in a very safe manner, run those trials. And they are happening. Okay. There is a big push for research in vulnerable populations, for research in populations that are poorly researched. So that is happening on the ground. I mean,
You're doing that, are you?
We have several trials running in the Rotunda at the moment as we speak, attempting to ask various questions and answers in terms of medications. So yeah, it is happening more and more now. And there is a huge recognition that this is an understudied population that we need to work on.
And is it that there's more funding required for it, or is it the pharma companies need to...
It needs support from pharma companies. It needs support from indemnity. Insurance costs are extremely high, appropriately so, in case things go wrong. For example, we are running studies now where the sponsoring university has to check the safety of every patient enrolled. Normally in studies, they would do a random check on a subset of patients, for example, or they will randomly select a few to see how things are going. But some of the studies that we run, every single patient enrolled is assessed by the sponsoring institution. And that takes a huge amount of resources to do, because if you're enrolling 300-400 babies and the sponsoring agency, the university, is checking the conduct in every single patient, that the data is collected appropriately, that the baby got the drugs when they were supposed to get the drug, that the baby got the placebo when they're supposed to get the placebo, that any complication that happens can be explained, attributed to the drug, not attributed to the drug. Huge amount of work.
Awesome. The amount of
yeah. So I want to reassure people
and
that
combinations.
people sometimes, I think, get the impression that we're doing experiments without the proper, not that they think that, but maybe that perception is out there. I mean, there are studies demonstrating that babies in research studies do better than babies outside of research.
So you're
studies.
researching the research studies even, and do parents have to sign a disclaimer and a waiver to allow their babies to go into this?
Not a disclaimer, but a consent form.
Okay.
So the parents are fully informed before anything done outside of routine clinical practice.
And do you find parents are happy to do this or not?
It's interesting. Again, there's the perception there that parents do not want their babies enrolled in trials, but we're actually finding the opposite. When you sit down, explain the rationale, and spend time answering questions and explain why you are doing and being honest about what you are doing, we more often than not find parents that are enrolled. And we actually looked at this recently. We had a trial looking at treatment in a specific condition where, if you ask neonatologists, half would go after it, the other half would leave it alone. So there isn't consensus on how to treat it.
Okay.
So we basically randomized babies, as in we did an experiment where we treated half and left alone the other half and explained to parents, look, there is an ongoing debate as to whether this is the right thing to do. And we had an 83% enrollment rate of the patients that we approached. So I think parents welcome research because they know that overall it does improve the care. And if you think about it, it's a very altruistic thing because you have to be very clear to the parents to not coerce them into entering research, to make them think that their babies will be better off being in a study, because that's not an ethical thing to do. That's coercion. So you have to be honest. And if they ask you, is this going to be better for my baby? Your answer should be, I don't know. That's why we're doing this study. But we can assure you that we are adopting the highest safety standards and we have protocols to address any eventuality should they occur. Okay. And parents respect that.
Well, I think anyone respects you being open and honest with them.
Yeah.
It's when people think that information has been hidden from them.
Yeah, you absolutely cannot do that. You have to be open and honest. And you also have to ensure that parents know that your refusal to enter your baby in the study will not in any way change the care that they receive in the unit, that you will still be treated in the best possible, highest standards, both professionally and in discourse, that you are not going to change how we behave and interact around you. You have the full right to say no, and you have the full right to change your mind. So if you say yes today and we start and the next day you say, actually, you know what? I don't want my baby in the study. That is absolutely fine. So they have full control of the process. And that's important for people to know as well.
Okay. The challenges experienced by healthcare providers in healthcare advocacy.
I suppose that goes back to the cancel culture thing that we talked about, in that how do you do healthcare advocacy nowadays? The easiest way to do it and the method that reaches the highest number of people is social media, right? I mean, people are reading less and less newspapers. People are not really going to websites to look at information. They really consume a lot of their information via social media. But I think the question you're asking me is slightly different, in that how do you strike a balance between health advocacy and not upsetting people about the message that you're spreading? Mm-hmm. And the one that comes up all the time for me personally is when you advocate for breastfeeding, or when you try and support breastfeeding, you always get this immediate breastfeeding against formula debate where you get mums or families in general that may feel ostracized or maybe cast aside to say, well, I didn't breastfeed, therefore now I feel bad, when you're talking about the benefits of breastfeeding. So trying to strike a balance in trying to spread information, but also being very inclusive. And that's what I have been trying to do, and I'd like to believe that I've been
I think you've done a really shocking job.
that I've been striking a balance. Of course, you can never.
You do, but I think there's also. I think we have to realise you're never going to please all the people all the time, and I think that if you stick to the facts, how can people argue with you? Well, people still argue with you, but there is that fine line, and I think that if you're going out there and you're being with an open heart and you're literally just giving the facts, then how can you stop doing what you're doing? Did you actually take that post down that you said that you'd taken down? Did you not put it back up again?
No, I didn't put it back up. I didn't put it back up. And if anything, that validated the dissenting voice.
Yeah.
And that, look, he took it down because he knew he was wrong. I mean, I did see these messages happening. And that's the thing, is that you stick to your guns.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I knew that was going to happen. I just felt unbalanced that I should just take it down and move on. But yeah, it's interesting. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people, even non-medics, for example, that, let's say, post a picture of them breastfeeding. They actually, I know a few high-profile people on Instagram have said that they have received so much abuse by individuals for posting a breastfeeding picture because it made them feel bad, and they felt quite upset about, well, this is what I'm doing. I'd like to promote it because I believe in it. If this post is not meant for you, then why are you reacting to it?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really easy to offend people, and
sometimes it is. It's always really easy, and there's people that just want to be offended too. And I think I think you just need to know in your heart you're just trying to do your best.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know Ricky Gervais, and he always the skit that always sticks to my mind is he talks about this cancel culture and people being offended online. And he's saying it's akin to somebody walking past a sign for guitar lessons and ripping. Do you remember where you have to, rip the number to call? Taking the number, phoning that number and saying, "I never asked for guitar lessons. How dare you?"
Actually, that's very true. You know, in a warped kind of way, it is true. So, log on.
If you don't like guitar lessons, that post is not for you.
Yeah.
I know. Don't make a point of telling me that it's not for you.
And I think sometimes with inclusivity, and inclusivity is so important, but I think we've almost gone the other way where you can't include everyone in your conversation if people are going to be offended by something that you might say.
I mean, another big topic that is really difficult to talk about is body weight.
Yeah.
Right. And advocating for a healthy lifestyle and body positivity and all of that. I know a lot of healthcare providers are now shying away or not really advocating addressing body weight issues if they have a direct impact on your health. People are moving away from that. But we know medically that there are issues with higher weight. I'm even afraid to use the O word,
Obesity, I'll use it. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm using every single other term because I know that obesity is a charged term now. But, that's another example of, and I remember seeing two opposing posts, which was very funny. Somebody was saying that they were offended because when they went to their doctor that they mentioned their weight and they were advised to maybe lose weight to fix A, B, and C. And then literally the next post after that was somebody complaining that their doctor did not raise their weight issues. And you're like, where is the balance? How do you actually strike a balance? I know everything's individualized, but I can't help but feel that healthcare providers are sometimes shying away from advocacy to avoid the backlash.
Well, a recent thing with that would be the government have recently announced that they're going to fund one round of IVF.
Yeah.
So they're going to fund, okay, so listen, it's great that we're getting this, right? But they have to fulfill certain criteria. Yeah. One of the criteria has to be that a person is within a certain BMI or under a BMI. Is it 30 maybe? And under the age of 40.
Yeah.
Or 40 and under, and then under a particular BMI. And people are saying, well, that's not fair. Maybe someone that's older that may have had difficulties and that they're also not funding it if someone has already tried IVF. So there's loads of criteria. The thing is that we need to start somewhere. And the thing is also is that IVF is less likely to work if
Yeah.
someone is of a certain BMI or is of a higher BMI. And because we have to start somewhere, we need to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I know that other people feel excluded too. The LGBTQI plus feel excluded because it has to be a male and a female that are going for it. So it is a tricky
it's
and
really
nuanced
hard
conversation.
and I suppose it's not a limitless resource, and that's why you have to have certain criteria.
And they want it to work for as many people as possible, I suppose.
Yeah.
So,
and the one that I couldn't reconcile in my head that people were complaining about is that people that have had children already were excluded. And I know that a few people with children were given out about the fact that they can't get a free round of IVF ahead of people without. So, and I found that wasn't hard. You could argue with the other ones, but if you have a child already, it makes sense that priority goes to people that do not have children first, maybe. And then once the resources become more available, then more people can avail of it, Yeah. It's hard to please everybody,
No, it absolutely is.
Yeah, it is.
One thing that I did want to talk to you about, and I'm cognizant of the fact that this podcast may not go out for a couple of weeks yet, and it's the 17th of October, and we are in a situation where Gaza is in an untenable predicament.
Yeah.
Because of the Israeli decision to invade. I don't know if they're, and because of the Hamas going into Israel and doing what they did. And you being half Palestinian, and even me talking about this, I'm actually finding it difficult to find the words, because it's like, you can't say black for white, really, because it's a topic that is so emotive.
Yeah.
The reality is that people are being killed unnecessarily, and there has been an occupation in Gaza for so long. Do you want to have a little bit of a discussion about this, or how this affects you even and your wider family maybe?
Yeah, I mean, my father is Palestinian. He was born in the West Bank, so in a town called Nablus, so in a small town just outside the city of Nablus in the West Bank. So he grew up there, and he went to Egypt to study medicine. And while he was in Egypt, the kind of 6-day war happened, and he wasn't able to come back. And he hasn't been able to go back since. So we're talking about, at this stage, 45 years. He then, once he graduated from medical school, he went to Saudi Arabia to work for a while and then moved to Kuwait. And met my mum, who's a Kuwaiti national, and settled there. Yeah, and he's still in Kuwait. So he hasn't been able to go back. He's got brothers and sisters that he hasn't seen.
And why can't he go back?
It's very complicated. I'll try and explain it. So when that happened, Jordan offered an amnesty to a lot of Palestinian refugees, granting them Jordanian citizenship. And my dad took that, and a lot of my dad's family took that as well. One of the conditions of taking that citizenship is that it removes your Palestinian identity and strips you from the right of going back to Palestine. So it was almost a way of maintaining your refugee status forever. So although it gave him, I suppose, the stability in terms of having a recognized citizenship somewhere, it meant that he could not go back to the West Bank after that. And that happened to a lot of Palestinians, myself included, because I'm a Jordanian national as well. And, citizenship is a funny thing, because I think a lot of what's happening, and you hear this discourse in the media now, is, and I'm sorry to say this, but there is an element of dehumanizing Palestinians that are in the West Bank, where it's okay to do what's happening to them because of this, of them being regarded by some, not all, but a small section, as not really equal. They're a bit subhuman. And in fact, they have been described as human animals by...
Oh, goodness, I saw that.
Yeah. And I think that strips humanity away, and it makes it more acceptable to witness what's happening. Because, well, what is the other explanation? And the reason I'm bringing this up, it's interesting because there's an American-German philosopher, Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you've heard of her before.
Yeah.
She was Jewish, and she was talking about the importance of having an identity and having a nationality, because she was arguing that a lack of citizenship or a stateless person, all they have left is their humanity, and that makes them a bit abstract. Because if all you have left is humanity, it makes others regard you as less of a human. Identity and citizenship is so important to us that lacking that in an individual makes them less human somehow. And that's the state of stateless people, right? And you could argue that Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are somewhat stateless because they do not have a recognized state. And that, I suppose, makes it easier for people to witness the hardship and not do as much about it.
Do you think it's also because they don't look like us? Like, I know that there was an outpouring, and justly, for the Ukrainian people when Russia invaded.
Yeah,
I had a friend from Ukraine. I felt it very much because I was speaking with her all the time about it. And do you think, and there was a discourse saying, these people look like us, therefore, oh my God, these are little white children wearing clothes like our little white children.
And I did hear that discourse. And before we go further into the conversation, I want to say that what Hamas did was abhorrent.
Yeah.
And very few Palestinians actually support Hamas or agree with what Hamas is doing, because all they do is make things worse. What they did to those poor children, to those poor Israelis, is horrendous, and nobody should undergo what these people have gone through. I have Jewish friends, I have Israeli friends, and I would not wish any of this on anybody. So I just wanted to get that out there, because it's
important.
It's almost expected of us to kind of,
I know,
to kind of say that, but I do mean it. I honestly do mean it. And I remember watching the news as it was unfolding, because I keep an eye on what happens in the Middle East. And I remember saying to my wife, Anne, going, this is horrendous, but the aftermath is going to be worse. And of course, we can all see what's happening, to the poor people in Gaza, many of whom are also stuck in the Hamas issue as well. Again, I don't want to get too political about it, but that's the reality of the Palestinian people, is that they're stuck literally between a rock and a hard place. But going back to the citizenship and identity thing, it's interesting because a lot of Arab countries do not grant citizenship based on birth.
Do they not?
No. So you go by your father's nationality, regardless of where you were born. So I was born in Kuwait. I was raised in Kuwait. My mother's Kuwaiti. I have no Kuwaiti citizenship.
Okay.
I now have to apply for a residence permit and a visa to return to my so-called home to visit my mother every time I go.
Okay.
And that whole lack of identity is something that Palestinians suffer from, So, imagine telling a child that was born in a country, that is growing up in the country, that knows nothing else but that country, that you don't belong to that place, and that you belong to an arbitrary other country that you didn't grow up in, because that's where your father is from, and that you're not entitled to the benefits, you're not entitled to citizenship there. That was one of the reasons, to be honest with you, why I decided to stay in Ireland when I came to do medicine here, because it was the first time where I felt a sense of belonging somewhere. Because when you grow up in a place that doesn't recognize you as a citizen, and then you come here, and I have to say I've had nothing but acceptance and welcoming. And then when I finally got my Irish citizenship at the age of 32, 33, that was the first time I felt a sense of belonging somewhere, which is crazy, Did
it take much to get that citizenship?
Oh, yeah. You have to be a taxpayer there's a few avenues to it.
So it wasn't the only reason why you married Anne then, no?
Well, you see, I want to put it on record that I gained my citizenship independent
of your wife,
of my marriage to Anne. So the funny thing is, your student years don't count, which I think is appropriate because you're not really contributing to society. So the Irish rules, they may have changed, I don't know, but I don't think they have, is that you have to be a taxpayer and residing in Ireland for 5 years before you become eligible.
Okay.
And then you apply. And then that process can take anywhere from 6 months to 3 years for you to get an answer. Or you could be married to an EU citizen or an Irish person for a duration of 3 years before you can apply
Okay.
for Irish citizenship. So it's not easy to
No.
come by, but I applied based on the fact that I was working here and paid taxes here for 5 years.
Okay, so not because of your wife.
Not
right.
because of my
I
wife.
don't know if
Yeah,
I believe that, but anyway, we'll
you could bring her on. You could bring her on to
I'm
see.
going to phone her and ask her.
Yeah.
And then actually coming to Ireland.
Yeah.
So you're only 17, and I know that we touched on this before, but we didn't touch on the fact that the way Irish people speak, and,
Oh my God.
and the language issues.
So I
What's the crack, Afif? What's the crack?
exactly.
Were you like, what in the name of God are these
So
people talking
I
about?
have so many funny stories about this. So after the war, which we didn't talk about, the Kuwaiti war.
Oh goodness, sorry. Yes, I'm terrible for skipping over things. Do you want to talk
go
about
back
that
to that?
first? Let's go back to the Kuwaiti
Yeah.
war, because this is why actually we just said we will discuss Gaza. We'll try and be.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very strange time, and I only realized recently. I mean, so it happened in 1990, and it was on the back end of an 8-year Iran-Iraq war that ended up in sort of a stalemate in 1988. And Kuwait, for political reasons, supported Iraq with literally billions and billions and billions of dollars to support the Iraq war against Iran. And I think what happened at the time was Saddam Hussein wanted Kuwait to forgive the $60-70 billion debt that they amassed. And I think there was a refusal. And then basically Saddam decided, based on his very kind of loose historical claims, that he's going to annex Kuwait because Kuwait had a huge wealth of oil. And I remember, there's not much I remember from my childhood, but I remember the scene of, it was a Wednesday night. We fell asleep. And on the 2nd of August, 1990, I remember waking up. My mum and dad were shaking me awake, and we were promised a trip to the beach that morning, the night before, because back then, Thursday and Friday were our weekends. So Wednesday was our Friday.
Okay.
And then Thursday and Friday were our Saturday, Sunday, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we were going to go to the beach. I remember being shaken, wake up, wake up, wake up. And I was like, great, time for the beach. And I remember seeing my parents' face, red eyes, as if they were crying. And I don't remember seeing my parents crying before. I was like, what's going on? What's going on? They said nothing. We were living in on the 8th floor of a building, right? Apartment building.
You were about 10 at the time, were you?
I was just turned 12.
Okay.
And I remember looking at the window, and we had like a dual carriageway in front of our apartment, and it was full of tanks. And I remember looking and saying, what's this? And my family was like, this is an Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. These are Iraqi tanks. And I remember going, what the hell? And they packed a suitcase because they wanted to go to my grandmother's house. So my grandmother at the time, my mother's mother, had a massive house, and she wanted all her siblings to be in the one place because we didn't know what was going on. And we literally moved to my grandmother's house. And
How did you get there?
by car.
By car.
Yeah.
So you were allowed, even though the tanks were driving on the roads, you were able to drive?
It was a risk, but they weren't sort of clamping down on people just yet. The invasion literally just happened, and there was no resistance. The Kuwaiti army was tiny, and the Iraqis had millions soldiers, like 1 million soldiers, something crazy like that. And we went to my grandmother's house, and we stayed there for the duration of the war. Both my parents were paediatricians. They continued to work for the duration of the war.
How long was that war?
It was about a 9-month invasion and about a week-long war to liberate Kuwait from the coalition. We dealt with a lot of issues because it was August. A lot of people were on summer holidays, and I had a couple of aunts. Actually, I had an aunt that was holidaying in Iraq as a Kuwaiti, so it was a rigmarole, them coming back. Another aunt that was holidaying in London, and she had to kind of fly over to Bahrain and couldn't come back for the 9 months. Her husband was in Kuwait. She had no contact with him because there was no mobile phones back then. There was no phones, no nothing. So my grandmother's house was quite big, and one of my uncles was married to an American citizen and had American kids. And at that stage, they were rounding up all Americans and literally shooting them. So we had to hide them.
Oh my God.
And they had to be smuggled to the Iraqi border, to the Saudi border to kind of fly back to America. So my uncle's wife and 4 children at the time. I remember one time overnight, my uncle bundling them in a car and driving in the middle of the night to the Saudi border. And he had to drive back because he couldn't leave with them. And he left them not knowing whether they were going to ever arrive to the States or not. And thankfully, it all worked out.
Were there many civilians killed during that war?
Yeah, they were rounding up people of fighting age, in inverted commas, and taking them as prisoners of war. And there's still a lot of POWs from back then that are unaccounted for. So because there was a local resistance that was building, again, occupier, occupied, a local resistance was happening, and that was deemed okay for some reason. But, in other situations, it's not, go figure. But, that was fine. And I remember being, as kids, we were protected. My parents saw horrors because they kept working in the hospital. They were given by the Iraqi army dispensation to go to work as doctors, and, they saw a lot of kind of horrible stuff. And then I remember when we had almost nothing to entertain us. We were cooped up in a house for all this time. Food was very scarce, and we had.
Scared?
So it's funny. I remember being scared every now and again when you hear bombs and explosions, and there was a couple of incidences that scared the bejesus out of me, and they still stick with me. But I'll talk about those in a second. But it's funny. We had Lego to keep us going, and we had
give a boy some Lego. I tell you,
yeah.
My brothers and my sons all loved it.
And we had 4 video cassettes. We had Back to the Future 1, 2, 3, and we had Ariel.
So you learned your English from there, did you?
and there was nothing else.
Oh my goodness!
Right, so learnt literally English from there, but very limited English.
Yeah.
And I think we used to watch them on repeat, just to kind of have something in the background, because all we had access to at that time was Iraqi propaganda TV. There was nothing else to watch,
What were they saying?
That Saddam Hussein was going to liberate Palestine and Israel, and Kuwait was the way to do it, and everybody should side with us. And then the problem was that, unfortunately, the Jordanian and Palestinian government at the time sided with Saddam Hussein because he kept saying he's going to liberate Israel. So my father was, as a Jordanian citizen, was almost kind of ostracized and targeted in Kuwait because of his citizenship, because of the Jordanian government stance against Kuwait.
Goodness, it's all so complicated.
Very, very
Was
complicated.
there other war crimes carried out as well as the killing? Were women taken and raped?
So that used to happen as well. Okay. I don't know of the scale because, again, we were kind of kids and we were protected. But I remember when the war was beginning to ramp up. By the war, I mean when the coalition was forming to try and kind of reclaim Kuwait. We had to board all the windows, and we had to put plastic bags along all the walls and windows because Saddam Hussein was threatening to use chemical weapons to annihilate the kind of Kuwaiti population. Thankfully, he didn't do that. But when the war happened, there was a Scud missile that fell about 30 yards away from the house, and it shattered all the windows in the house. And I remember we're sleeping in the living room on the ground floor under the window, and the force of the blast basically shattered the window on the board and it flew over me. Now, it was so strong that glass didn't touch me, thankfully. I was literally sleeping under the window and it kind of went across. And the funny thing is I had this massive ringing in my ear, and I remember that. And I remember a few years ago, I was telling Anne, gosh, look, I have really bad tinnitus that I just can't shake. and I need to get it checked out. She's like, is it new? No, it's always been there. But in a heightened state of anxiety, it sort of becomes really prominent. And I remember going to an ENT doctor, an ear, nose and throat doctor, and he checked, you do this audiology hearing screen. And he said, you have a very funny hearing loss pattern that I only see in one situation. You have perfect hearing throughout your whole kind of decibel range, except one frequency where you have total hearing loss. And then it comes back up to normal beyond that. And the only time I see this pattern described is in soldiers in war, when there are massive blasts that kill those particular cells that deal with that high frequency pitch.
Oh, wow.
Were you in a war? And I said, actually, and that came flooded back to me what happened. And that's what he puts it down to, is that big rocket falling and causing the massive explosion.
My goodness. And you know the way that's come back to you, and you seem pretty put together. Can you imagine what it's like for children?
Yeah,
and see and hear this.
It's interesting what you said, because there was another incident whereby towards the end of the war, Iraqi soldiers were trying to flee back to Iraq, and they were very poorly equipped and had no vehicles or anything like that. So they were literally going into random houses, grabbing keys to just leave. And they came into my grandmother's house. They literally, like a few of them, one of them grabbed me and had the gun and said to my dad, the keys are your son. And I remember thinking at the time, this is strange, And of course, my parents panicked, gave him the keys, and they took the car and left. And it's funny how, like, once the war finished and you kind of got on with your life and you came here, had a great time, and everything was kind of suppressed and pushed deep into the kind of subconscious. And I actually never thought of the war and how it potentially had the long-lasting impact and everything. But when do you kind of are in a huge state of anxiety, and that kind of came across a lot in a lot of the mums that we interviewed in our podcast, is once you have a child, you begin to look at the world in a different way. Your instinct to protect kind of comes through. And I remember when my daughter was born, I began to get these huge bouts of inexplicable anxiety that everything was a threat, that everything was bad, that the world out there was bad. So much so that it was, I think, became pathological. And this is the first time I'm speaking about this kind of openly. And I had to get like CBT for this.
Mm-hmm.
And
cognitive behavioral therapy, for anyone out there that doesn't know that.
And I remember saying, look, I don't know why this is happening. It is happening because burglaries are high. There's no Gardaí. And I was justifying all of these things. And they just tell me about your childhood. And then I was like, well, I had a good childhood, and then there was the war, and then I came here like, hold on a second. Go back to, tell me, what war are you talking about? And I sort of explained to her what I just kind of said to you, and she was like, do you not think that there's a lot of PTSD going on here that has become apparent now that you've had a child? And then I realized that I haven't dealt with being in a war until very, very recently.
Yeah.
And that's something that has become to the forefront once I had children, that it kind of brought it all back up. The instinct to protect have sort of brought it up. And the first clue I should have figured this out is my daughter, when we were in Canada, was obsessed with Disney princesses, right? And her favorite princess, I don't know how, was Ariel. Right. And I remember Ariel was one of the few movies that we had in the war. And I remember sitting down watching it with her when she was about 2 or 3 the first time. And it was probably the first time I rewatched Ariel after the war. And the song, do you know, I'm sure you're familiar with the movie, are you?
So I have to be really honest with you, I have 3 sons, so I have no...
So there's a particular song in it called Part of That World, where she sings about how she is dreaming about leaving the sea and going up to the shore to be like humans and losing her fins and having feet. And she started singing it. And I started sobbing uncontrollably. And I remember Anne looking at me going, what's wrong with you, you idiot? It's just a Disney movie. She's just talking about having legs. And
oh my God. And Anne would be cutting, wouldn't she? She'd be like, Afif, get over yourself.
And she was like, she'll be fine, Afif. Ariel will be fine. And, and I didn't actually realize that it was a trigger to just reminding me of because I literally probably watched it 100 times. I kid you not, with my cousins, because that's all we had. And it was the first time I've watched it since. And it just must have brought my subconscious came flooding back. And to this day, I can't sit through Ariel.
Did you acknowledge it at the time?
No, I didn't. Okay. I didn't figure it out because I remember processing this later on, going, because I didn't realize, because if I listen to this song now, I get very emotional, like ridiculously emotional. And people would go, I can't listen to it. I can't watch that movie.
Okay.
And I think this is why. I'm pretty sure it's why.
Well, absolutely, but it does go to show you how you can suppress.
I can't be that invested in Ariel getting feet and
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Unless you're really emotionally tuned.
But why am I harping on about this is the impact of war on kids, I think, is ridiculous. And to see the kids going through what they're going through right now on both sides, but let's be honest, it's a lot worse in Gaza than it is in Israel. But I mean, I feel for the children in Israel as well as those in Gaza. All it does is that it perpetuates more hate. I remember feeling so much hate for Iraqis that to this day I find it hard to get rid of.
Okay.
And I know now objectively that if I meet an Iraqi person, that they are a nice human being, but there is always a bit of my subconscious where this comes to the forefront, and you have to objectively say no. And I think the cycle of hate in the Middle East needs to be broken, because we are raising two separate generations of kids that feel probably uncontrollable hate for one another. And how do we break that cycle? How do we actually break that cycle? Because even me growing up in Kuwait, the teaching was hate the other. They're the baddies. They want this, they want that. And I remember my first encounter with a person of a Jewish faith was when I was in Ireland as a young adult studying medicine. And I didn't know how to react.
Okay.
In that, like, wow, you're just a normal person. But I was told that you're out to get me all the time. Yeah. And it took me this long to actually break that cycle in my head and working through it. And then it really got reinforced when we went to Toronto to do our fellowship, because Toronto has a really strong Jewish population, not a strong, but a significant, large is the word I'm looking for, a large Jewish population. And then you learn they're decent people that just want to live, and have developed amazing friendships. And I then made it a thing that I do not want my kids to grow up in this notion of hating a person based on their color, gender, religious beliefs, nationality. And the problem is, and it's still there, and there are parts in the Arab world where you are judged purely on those things and nothing else. And this is what I love about my kids growing up here, in that they don't see color. They don't see race. They don't see religious beliefs. They just see a human in front of them, and they treat them based on how they're treated. And that's what we need to do in the Middle East, especially in Palestine, Israel, is to break that cycle of hate. But how do we do that? I actually really don't know, because all you're doing is perpetuating that, aren't you?
Yeah, I was going to say to you, do you have any idea what we could do to stop that? Look, it's going to take lots of diplomacy. It's going to take lots of talk.
But even we need to probably move it away from politicians, because, there's a lot of Palestinians that work in Israel, and they see the interactions. They have good relationships with people. People can actually, at individual level, really get on with each other. Mm-hmm. But it's the political and the government level that needs to change. Because I think if you leave people at it, they'll eventually figure it out. And I'm hoping that generation after generation, where things become more globalized, people are moving around, that things will slowly get better. But how do you solve it for people that are trapped in a let's be honest, an open air prison that can't leave, can't experience life, can't interact with kind of the other side. How do you do that? I don't know.
I know. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And actually, what you were saying about raising your children in a society where they don't see colour, they don't see it reminds me of a conversation I was having with a friend of mine there recently. So she said that her child was in school and has been in school the last couple of years, and all the child talks about is this friend of his, Peter this, Peter that. All and my friend says, I know Peter's life intimately. I know all about him because my son tells me all about him. And then the school calendar came out, and he goes, and he was dying to show her who Peter was, and Peter was a little black boy.
Yeah.
And my friend was like, so she imagined Peter to be a white boy.
Yes.
Because at no time her child described, even though it could describe the clothes that Peter was wearing, the clothes his mum wore, never described him as brown or black.
Yeah.
So children don't see it.
They don't see it. And I have an identical story to that. My son Faisal, when he was in primary school, he kept telling us about this friend that he really gets on with in school. And Anne wanted to invite him to a play date. And I can't remember his name, but she was like, describe him to me so I can see which one he is, so I can ask his mum, can he come on late? Well, he usually wears a blue cap and he has a red bag and he loves his black shoes and he loves football. Anything else? Yeah, he likes Minecraft. Anything else? Well, yeah, sometimes at lunchtime he likes eating cheese sandwiches. And then she picked him up from school one day, Faisal, and she was like, okay, point out to your friend, there he is. And again, he was a black kid.
Yeah.
And Faisal used every single way to describe him except his skin colour.
So kids
Isn't that amazing? They don't see it. I think we instill it in them then.
Yeah.
You know, we instill it in them. We teach them about racism. Then they become aware of all these things.
Yeah.
So I don't think people are born racist.
No,
you know,
absolutely
and those
not.
are two prime examples.
Yeah, 100%. And both of us have experienced it. So let's get back to you coming to Ireland and the language.
Yeah,
we'll finish on a funny note.
Yeah,
I think
it's funny. We'll finish on a funny note because I remember when I decided, look, I want to go to the West because the West seems like fun. Because once after the war, we went to an English school.
All those women wearing, no hijab.
Yeah.
It looks a great place.
I know, and I remember not being able to talk to a girl for the first couple of years.
Really?
But anyway, so went to an English school, thought I got accustomed to the culture. All we had in Kuwait were American sitcoms. Like it was really American heavy influence after the war.
Okay.
Everything became Americanized. We got McDonald's, we got Starbucks, we got everything after the war. And I remember growing up on Saved by the Bell and Beverly Hills,
oh my God, I love Saved by the Bell.
and Baywatch, and all of these American shows. And I was like, I got the Western culture down to a T. I'm going to know exactly how to behave when I go to Ireland.
Little did you know.
So I arrived when I was 17, and I'm a very literal guy. I struggle with the ability to have abstract thinking. And the Irish language is nothing but abstract. And I remember going, I know you're speaking to me in the English language, but I have no idea what you're saying. And, some of the phrases that the Irish use that I think are absolutely hilarious when I first came, I remember being told, if you have a problem, give me a shout. I'm kind of going, you want me to scream at you? If I have a problem? It's like, just give me a shout. And I honestly did not know what that meant.
Okay.
I was like, okay. And I had to go and ask. When I first came here, I went to live in digs with an old lady. She was lovely, and I had to go to her.
There's no Google Translate actually either. So
nothing.
You're looking up the dictionary.
If you have a problem, give me a shout.
Okay.
And, I was like, okay, I will shout at you next time I have a problem. And it's funny because I remember my dad getting an email. It was when emails began to start about how from I went to the institute to do my leaving cert, and my dad got an email sent or a letter, I can't remember, from the principal. And again, he ended it by, if you have any problem, give us a shout. And I remember my dad calling me and he said, your principal wants me to scream at him.
Yeah.
It's like, no, Dad, I know what that means. It means give them a call. It's like, why didn't he say call me? It's like, that's how the Irish speak. And then I also remember, you know, come here to me. It's like closer than we are now. Like, no, come here to me. And I would literally advance and come close. What are you doing?
Afif.
What are you doing? Well, you asked me to come here to you. And then I'd say something and they'll say, go away. And I'd feel going, did I offend you? Or you want me to?
That must be so confusing.
Do you want me to leave the room?
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny, like, take things really literally. My favorite is one, I remember somebody describing to me that, you know, somebody left the room very quickly. And the way he was describing it is, and I turned around and there she was, gone.
You're like, what does this mean?
And I'm kind of looking at you going, she was there? No. There she was, gone. It's like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to explain this to me. What do you mean? Like, she's in the room and then she left, or she left? It's like, no, when I turned around, she was gone. It's like, oh, you mean she was gone after you turned around? Yeah, there she was, gone. And just something as simple as that, it took me ages to get over it.
But even the way, you know, when we actually are being affectionate with each other, we go, you bollocks you, or you be, what?
Yeah, exactly. So I got over all of that. And then I could never find anything, because the way the Irish give directions is bonkers.
Yeah.
You know, you tell me that I've gone too far if I find something. I was like, how is that useful to me? It's like, you know, you go down, you turn right, you turn left, and you know when you get to the church, yes, well, you've gone too far. How is that useful? You know, how is that? I
suppose from an outsider looking in, it seems strange. But
and now it's like,
no, you talk to that yourself.
Now I talk like that myself. And then, you know, I remember when I was told, what's the story? I was like, do you want me to tell you a story? What do you want? Yeah. But the funniest thing, and to this day I'll never forget it, is myself and a poor guy from Oman were living in digs together. So I had my room, he had his room. His English was very poor. Like I had good American English, you know, so I could get by despite all these kind of issues. But I remember one day I went into his room to have a chat and he was really upset. I was like, what's wrong? Can't remember his name. This was like in 95, 96. And he was like, and it was back when the only kind of sustainable method of communication was writing letters. Did you ever write a letter to anyone? And he used to write letters to his family in Oman because he couldn't afford phone calls all the time. He was very sad. And I was like, what's wrong with you? And he was like, I've written like 5 or 6 letters to my family and they never respond. I was like, what? Like, yeah, like it's been like 3 or 4 months. I haven't gotten one letter back. Like I'm writing them a letter every couple of weeks, telling them about how I'm getting on. And nobody's writing back to me. I've written to my brother. I've written to my uncle, who I'm really close with. I've written to my grandmother. She loves letters. She never. And he was like really upset. And I was like, well, are you putting enough postage on them? I was like, yes, I'm sure I'm putting enough posters. And how are you posting them? So I'm putting them in the letterbox. And I said, okay. So I was like, it's like, okay, well, he's like, this is the final letter that I'm going to write. And okay, let me come with you. Let's walk together and see what your process is to see if we can identify any issues. So he walks by a bin, fix it in the bin. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm putting it in the litter box. Like,
litter box.
I was like, what?
Oh my God.
He thought litter meant this is where the letters go. So he was literally binning. He was binning all his letters for like months. Weeks and months. And he was literally putting them in the bin, thinking that it said litter, meaning that's where and he was like, yeah, I've always wondered why the letterboxes are very filthy. I thought the Irish people were just not dirty. Respectful and dirty.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, dude, that's the bin. So I know the poor guy. So we had a good laugh about that afterwards, but and I still tell that story to everyone.
Yeah, you never think about the language, but you know those little nuances with language. It's funny, and actually, the Irish do have a very unique way of talking to each other.
And you know, everyone in the Gulf calls it a garbage bin or something like that, not a litter thing or whatever.
Okay, so, yeah, you put it in the garbage.
Yeah, put it in the garbage.
Or put it in the trash, even.
Yeah, trash or garbage, not litter. The word litter is very kind of foreign to us, so that was very funny.
I can see how that would be misinterpreted.
That was very funny. So it was a challenge to get used to the Irish language. And then I thought I got the hang of Dublin. And then the school took us on a trip to Killarney. And oh my God, it was like learning another alien language when we went down to Kerry. I could not understand anyone. Absolutely. It was ridiculous. I didn't even try.
Yeah, no, they have a dialect all of their own down there, don't they?
I mean, I can handle it now, but I'm here now 29 years nearly. So, but I love it here. It's great. I'm yet to come across anyone that speaks English that speaks like the Irish. And you know what the interesting thing is? Irish grammar and Arabic grammar are very similar. They have almost identical rules.
Okay.
Yeah, so, a lot of the time how the words go in front of another and the makeup of sentences. Irish and Arabic are very similar.
As in
the
Gaeilge,
rules.
Irish.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The way they would describe, like, I have a cold on me as opposed to I have a cold. That
exactly.
Kind of
and then, we say in English big house, but in Ireland you put the adjective after, don't you? It's like a house big. It's the same in Arabic.
Okay.
A house big, rather than a big house and things like that. So, the grammar is very similar, and I found that very interesting.
Yeah, and even the way certain things that we say in Ireland, we say I'm 10 stone because of the way that Irish languages say that. Not I'm 10 stones. It's just, it is interesting.
It took me ages to figure out what a stone was as well, because that was a foreign concept to me. It's like, I've put on a couple of stone, and I said, are they in your pocket, or are you carrying them in the bag? What do you mean? And then I didn't realize that a stone was a measure of weight. And I was like, how weird is that? Because very strange. Yeah.
I suppose it's funny how you don't think of these things when you're living in it all the time.
And even the final one is, I remember I had to do 6 months in Limerick as a junior doctor. And again, I learned a whole new language there. And I remember that there's something called a double pneumonia, that they all had double pneumonias there. It's never a single pneumonia, it's a double pneumonia. I think he's got the double pneumonia and he's lobbing and lying. And I'm like, opening my medical book.
What is lobbing and lying?
I realize if you're lobbing and lying, it's a serious condition. Doc, he's lobbing and lying. He's not usually like that.
What is the double pneumonia? Where did they get that from?
I don't know. They just, I think he's got the double pneumonia, doctor.
Okay, so it's very sick. He's very sick of his.
And then I'll never forget the 3-year-old that came to me. I was like, come here, want cha? And I was like, excuse me? Come here, want cha? And I was like, what? Come here, want cha? And then the nurse was basically amusingly watching this interaction, and she was like, she just wants to talk to you. It's like, she's saying, come here, I want you. I was like, oh, okay, what would you like? I was like, I actually don't know what you're saying. Yeah.
It must be difficult for people to get, and of course we have a lot of foreign doctors working in Ireland.
Yes, I feel for them.
Yeah.
But I think they have to kind of learn the language very quickly.
They just do. It is funny when you might come encounter an Indian lady and she literally has, like what you say, a Limerick accent. You don't expect it to come out. It's funny in her Indian with her own Indian accent mixed in.
But it's a beautiful way of talking, I have to say, and it's a very unique way of speaking English, and it's great. It's very unique to Ireland, and I think it's what makes the Irish lovable around the world is the language they use. It's very kind of poetic how language is used here. It's great.
Well, actually, while I have you now, and while we're talking about, we did mention foreign people working in, around the country and that, and it just got me thinking about the healthcare system at the minute. So there was something recent there from the minister wanting hospitals to be more productive and put a ban on, a cap on recruitment and all the rest. So working in a busy hospital, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's difficult because I know and I think what you're talking about is the ban on recruiting doctors outside of a training scheme.
Yeah.
So the way it works in Ireland for junior doctors is some doctors do their training or they work in a hospital as part of a training scheme. So they get experience in hospitals and it gets recognized as training so they can advance through the grades to eventually become a consultant. There's only a finite number of those training scheme jobs where you are working, but also training to specialize in a certain area. And there's a huge number of what we call as service jobs. They're jobs outside of a training scheme, whereby you're working there, you're doing exactly what a person on a training scheme is doing, but your work is not recognized as training. So you can't advance in your career doing those. Now, it's slowly changing, but that's the case. And they're putting a ban on the non-training scheme, which I think is a problem because these jobs are literally propping up hospitals, especially hospitals outside of Dublin, that rely heavily on overseas doctors to keep the service going. And you often hear stories of deficits in service all around the country that can only really be plugged by people from overseas doing these non-training jobs, because the Irish doctors, appropriately so, opt for training scheme jobs because they want to progress through their career ladder, if you like. And then the less competitive jobs would be the non-training jobs that a lot of foreign doctors that may be starting their life here do for a while before they try and enroll in a training scheme.
And why is there such a block? Why is it so difficult to get onto a training scheme? Is there just a limited amount of places?
There's a limited amount of places, and there is preference for EU people to be on the training schemes ahead of non-EU people, which I suppose is something that needs to be accepted here. And I think limiting the ability to recruit for these training schemes is going to have an impact on the service going forward, because these jobs literally keep the services running. So it's something that needs to be reconsidered, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amongst other things.
Yeah, I mean, I graduated from Ireland. So I graduated from Trinity. So thankfully, I'm not really regarded as an overseas person. They usually, if you're an Irish graduate, you can somehow get on a training scheme easier than if you're, say, completed your training from abroad and applying for a job here with a degree from abroad.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the health system in general and the work in hospitals, it's difficult. Like, I know so many nurses that have left their posts, doctors even, that are, reconsidering their career because of the pressure that's put on them. So then when they, when there's a recruitment ban, then there's more pressure on the people that are there. I've had messages from people saying, actually, after looking at that headline, I'm actually going to hand in my notice because I can't have another winter like this.
It can be very difficult, especially for people working in high pressure areas like emergency, like intensive care, like a lot of specialties. So I really feel for them. It's not easy. I don't know what the answer is, but I see the need to try and curtail spending. But I think we just need to be more efficient in how we spend the health service and look at other areas that we can find efficiencies. If you speak to people on the ground, they will tell you that there's a lot of waste going on, and it's something that we need to look at.
Yeah, okay. Have your answers to my 2 really important questions changed in the last year?
Oh yeah, I forgot we had to do the advice. What are the 2 questions again?
What is your advice to young people today, and what is the meaning of life?
Okay, advice to young people is don't believe everything you see on social media.
Okay.
And really try and develop your critical thinking skills. And I know that sounds a bit wacky and off, but...
Well, no, actually it doesn't. I think everyone should develop their critical thinking skills.
I think we lack, as a society, our ability to critically think. Looking at the information in front of you, assimilating it, deciding whether, or researching it, and taking it at face value or not, looking at the nuances, looking at the context, and then make a judgment call. Don't react to information that you see. And I think everybody should develop or try and work towards critical thinking, because I think that would make us a better society overall. Okay. And I suppose that fits in with the conversations that we've had, so far, because everybody's going to present one side of the story, and the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I suppose what's happening at the moment with the war in Gaza is a case in point. I'm sure the truth lies somewhere, in the middle. Each side is trying to portray themselves as the victim. The balance may shift towards one side over another, but usually it's not at one extreme or the other. Isn't that right? And if we were able to critically think about it and not react and not take sides, I see a lot of posts now saying it's okay to denounce Hamas but still support the Palestinians. And that's okay to do. It's not one side or another. And there's a lot of conflation between Hamas and Palestinians, and you see that in the media. It's Israel against Hamas, and or Israel against the Hamas Palestinians, or something like that. They're always conflated, and I think that's on purpose. I might be a bit cynical, but so critical thinking is important.
Okay. And then what's the meaning of life?
Meaning of life, I know, especially in those kind of troubling times. I remember Anne said it's all about love, and I usually said it's about leaving a legacy behind or something that would benefit people. So, a combination of the two, I think we could do with that. Try and understand people, take people at face value, and just get to know people, and don't judge people based on something arbitrary like colour or race.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Afif, I think we'll check in with each other every year, will we? Once a year, get
I
you
think
on.
that's amazing because, I need to build up my episode numbers to increase my count over Anne's, and you're not allowed to have Anne back. That's still grating on me now.
Okay. Well, once we get this out, I'll let you know how it does. And
Yeah,
if you've beaten
and
Anne
can we
then with your
combine the
two.
counts together? Yeah, to go against her, because it's
that's cheating.
It is very cheating, because I remember, not that, I just happened to track how her episode was doing, and that week I saw her topping the Irish charts, and she was above the what's his name, the Huberman Lab.
Huberman Lab, I know.
And I'm like, you've beaten Huberman Lab. And she was like, is that a good thing? I was like, of course it's a good thing. It's like one of the most popular podcasts globally, and your episode pipped him to number 1.
I love the way she's so unassuming. Is that good?
She's like, yeah, it's like, is that good? And she genuinely didn't know how well she did, and I kept telling her that it's amazing.
She was great.
Yeah, she was
great.
Anyway,
shout out to Anne.
Enough talking about Anne. Anyway,
okay,
yeah.
Afif, it's been great. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much.